So we've covered quite a few characters in the series now, but let's broaden our scope a little and start taking a look at each of the games themselves. This week, let's go all the way back to the beginning, Fatal Frame 1, and look at some neat facts about the game that started it all. 1. Fatal Frame 1 was released for the PlayStation 2 in Japan on December 13, 2001. This makes it a rare winter release for a horror game, as these tend to be released in the summer. It was then released for NA consoles on February 27, 2002, and EU on August 30th, 2002. 2. And interestingly, the name of the game is also different in all three regions. In Japan, it's known simply as Zero. In NA, it's known as Fatal Frame, and in EU, Project Zero. According to Shibata, the game was developed under the codename Project Zero, but ultimately went with the simpler title, Zero. The character for Zero can also be read as Day, which is of course also one of the ways you can say ghost in Japanese. EU decided to stick with that Project Zero moniker because Zero doesn't really have that same interesting wordplay in English. NA instead decided to go with the far more thrilling sounding Fatal Frame, something you can do with the camera in-game. 3. The idea for Fatal Frame came about after Shibata worked on the Deception series. According to him, they required them to come up with a complex game system and some outside-the-box thinking. So, when the PS2 came around, he wanted to do something entirely different. A simple game system, but something rich in emotion and atmosphere. This naturally lent itself well to horror, and being that Shibata himself claims that he can, and often has seen ghosts, and games like Silent Hill were quite popular, they decided to go with a ghost game. 4. In Shibata's mind, he sees Fatal Frame 1 as the scariest game in the entire series. That's because the idea for this game was purely to scare players, to make them soak in the atmosphere of this haunted house and the tragedies that occurred there. However, he claimed that because of that, many players gave up and never finished the game. So, starting with the next game, they decided to focus a little more on the story as well, to keep players intrigued and playing the entire game through. 5. Fatal Frame 1 is Shibata's baby, and according to producer Kikuchi, he entirely came up with the concept, plan, and story all by himself. Iuchi Tsuyoshi then worked on the actual script and text you see in-game. The idea for a Japanese-style mansion had been on Shibata's mind since his Deception days, and while working on the concept, the plan was to set it in the modern day. But then it was shifted back to the 1980s. This was so the player would feel more isolated in the middle of nowhere with no modern technology, such as cell phones, to help them. 6. Realizing they needed some sort of combat to deal with the ghosts, numerous methods were tested, including using religious amulets, a torch, Hamaya arrows, and even a screaming system where you could shout at ghosts to make them disappear. But none of these really fit what they were after, and in the end, they decided to try a camera, which was something Shibata initially wanted. After all, Japan has numerous legends about cameras being able to steal a small part of your soul. And this way, the fear of the ghosts would not only remain, but could even be heightened, as you would have to wait until they got close to get the best and most powerful shots. 7. According to Kikuchi, the game was originally much more violent, but they had to edit and remove some scenes that were deemed way too much for a video game. This included seeing Kirie torn apart by the ropes, and the Himuro family master committing seppuku. But looking back on the game years later, he also mentioned that he wished they'd shown even less of the rituals in the game, not more. 8. Shibata wanted a special emphasis on hearing the ghosts in the game, not just seeing them. This was again based on his own experiences of generally hearing, not seeing spirits, and so he worked with the programmers closely to get the sounds right. You don't hear them often, but when you do, they should terrify you. This is heightened by long periods of silence in between, making the sounds all the more impactful when you do finally hear them. And not only that, but the sound is in 3D, so if you listen through headphones, you should be able to accurately pinpoint which direction the sounds are coming from, including Miku's own footsteps beneath you. 9. In conjunction with this, he was also particular about the lighting in the game, constantly fine-tuning each room's particular lighting and screen noise, which was supposed to represent Japan's summer humidity, due to the game taking place in the summer months. 10. Although many of the ideas for the game came from Shibata's own experiences, the team also took inspiration from many other places. Kikuchi mentioned watching old Japanese horror films, as well as old war films, to help create the visual structure they were after. The manga Yokai Hunter by Morohoshi Daijiro also inspired Shibata with its heavy emphasis on folklore and Shinto and Buddhist themes. 11. During its first week of release, Fatal Frame sold 22,000 copies in Japan, eventually going on to sell another 20,000 copies, for a total of around 42,000. This makes it the lowest selling game in the entire series, but it still did well enough to warrant further sequels, thankfully. The EU version reportedly sold around 12,000 copies in Europe, according to UK chart data at the time. But outside of that, details get murky. According to VG charts, the game overall sold around 140,000 copies worldwide. Being that it was mostly aimed at a homegrown audience, both Shibata and Kikuchi were pleased that foreign audiences also took to the game, and they credited the success of Ring at the time with helping get people interested in Japanese ghosts. 12. Initially, Shibata ended up doing some motion capture to show how he wanted the ghosts in the game to move, but feeling that wouldn't be good enough for the final cut of the game, they eventually hired a specialist to do the ghostly movements. Yes, those ghosts you see have actually been motion captured. The idea was to show that, yes, these spirits are dead, but they're not stiff corpses. These spirits still have their own emotions, motivations, and personalities that come through in how they move. 13. The theme colours for the game are white, black, and red. These represent light, aka hope, darkness, aka fear, and blood, aka life. As I mentioned earlier, the devs spent a lot of time on getting the lighting just how they wanted it, and when the colours changed to sepia, that was also designed specifically to show that a scene was taking place in a different time period. 14. Some of the background noises you hear in the game are Shibata himself. When he was young, he claimed to hear voices on a road leading to a shrine. He couldn't see anything, and even contemplated taking a picture, but never did. However, he wanted to reproduce that feeling for the game, and so he recorded an imitation of those voices that was then included in the game. 15. The scene where Miku first encounters Ogata Koji's ghost was originally much longer. Because it's the first time Miku is attacked by a ghost, the devs wanted it to be perfect and really make an impact. It was originally going to be a long take, with Ogata slowly approaching Miku, but whenever she turned around, she wouldn't be able to see anything, even though she could sense someone was there. This would happen 3 times, and then, once she caught a glimpse of the ghost, this would happen another 3 times, before she finally dropped her camera in fear. But in the end, the scene was simply too long and interrupted the flow of the early game, and so it was cut down to be a much more speedy introduction instead. 16. Another of the reasons the devs set the game in a haunted house was, well, the normalcy of it. That is, for Japanese players, they would be incredibly used to these types of Japanese-style houses, and they hoped to create a sharp contrast with that normalcy and the abnormal things happening in the game. Plus, Japanese houses are, according to Shibata, full of sliding doors, open spaces under the floors, attics, etc. Plenty of places for creepy things to hide. 17. During development, Kikuchi noted that he asked Shibata about performing a purification ritual, something not all too uncommon in the Japanese entertainment world when working on something that features ghosts. While Shibata didn't forbid them, he apparently told them that it would be scarier if they didn't, and they could even use that as a selling point. So, the team didn't hold a purification ritual. But for team members who did believe in the supernatural, they took to hanging charms and such around the place, including on themselves. Even Shibata said he put a charm up. 18. The Japanese title, Zero, didn't initially come from the fact that both ghost and zero can be said in Japanese as day. Rather, Kikuchi was thinking about how things that don't exist are generally represented with the number 0. And being that ghosts are not supposed to exist, well, 0. But ghost and 0 both being pronounced as day was an extra bonus. 19. Shibata claimed that the reason they specifically went with ghosts was that there simply weren't any horror games at the time where the enemies were specifically ghosts. There were all sorts of monsters, but ghost games in the survival horror genre just weren't really a thing. With his wealth of knowledge and experience with them, and his desire to make a horror game in a Japanese mansion, it all just came together. 20. When it came to the rituals, he was particularly inspired by the Visitor of Darkness episode of the Yokai Hunter manga. It was the spiritual beliefs in particular that had a big impact on him, especially things like festivals being held to interact with the other side, and perhaps more importantly, being held to keep the other side sealed away from our own. 21. Shibata had long seen in his mind the protagonist being a woman carrying a camera around. That camera was so big that, from a distance, it would look like a handbag. Because they wanted the camera to be large, they ended up going with an old World War II German military camera as the basis for the camera obscura. Because these can fold in and out, the devs hinted that perhaps Miku is doing the same when she's walking around the mansion. 22. Initially, you weren't given much film throughout the game, but after watching people play the demo version, devs realized that it was too hard and stopping people from fully engaging with the camera mechanics. As such, they ended up upping the amount of film in-game in the hopes that people would try to take better pictures in battle. 23. Originally, Fatal Frame was going to have a different introduction. This started with both Miku and Mafuyu in a car, Mafuyu driving them through a forest towards a mansion in the mountains, where 3 inhabitants of a nearby village had gone missing. They were later found with their heads and limbs ripped off. Mafuyu was hoping to turn this story into an article for the magazine he worked for. Then, as Miku looked at some photos in the car, she would see ropes momentarily appear around the wrists and ankles. After falling asleep in the car, she would wake up and find herself standing in the entrance of a large Japanese-style house, with 3 dead bodies in front of her. Then, she would find herself in the rope hallway, much like the final game, with the large mirror at the end reflecting a woman in a white kimono behind her. As Miku runs, hands from all over grab her, and then she wakes up. She's still in the car, but Mafuyu is gone. Up ahead, she sees that same house with their mother's camera on the ground in front of it. This long sequence was changed because, well, it was too long, and they wanted players to get right into the game and learning how to use the camera. Thus, it was changed to have Mafuyu actually be playable, as a sort of tutorial. 24. Originally, the game was going to be 5 chapters, but again, this made the game too long. The original parts featuring Dr. Aso, who was going to play an actual part in this game, were cut, and the story of the Munakata family and the old rituals were combined into 1 chapter. This meant several cutscenes also had to be scrapped, including Mikoto getting scared during the demon tag ritual and fleeing into the mountains. These were made into newspaper articles instead to save time. Interestingly, this means many players may miss out on the fact that Miku, who is Mikoto's granddaughter, is actually continuing the same game of demon tag that her grandmother was playing before she fled the Himuro mansion in terror. This is why Miku keeps finding children around the mansion. She is now taking part in the game in her grandmother's stead. 25. Originally, the path from the Moon Shrine leading to the Hell Gate was also going to have more mummies. The intent was to have each previous rope shrine maiden enshrined there, but apparently the dev who was in charge of that area hated mummies and refused to create any more. 26. Depending on the version you play, Miku will look different. Her model was changed for the Western releases to make her more appealing to a Western audience. These changes included lightening her hair, adding more colour to her pale skin, making her taller and curvier, and slightly changing her clothes. In Fatal Frame 5, you can get skins of both her Japanese and Western Fatal Frame 1 looks as bonus skins for her daughter, Miyu. 27. The game was ported to Xbox almost a year after its PS2 release, coming out in NA first on November 27, 2002. The Japanese release followed on February 6, 2003, and then finally EU on May 2, 2003. The Xbox version features a new difficulty, boss, ending, and other small changes here and there, as well as some new costumes. Interestingly, the Xbox version of the game uses Miku's Western redesign, even in Japan. And, even in Japan, the Xbox version of the game is still called Fatal Frame. 28. Although the game has sadly never been remade, it does have a patchy slot version that is the closest thing we have right now to a revamped and remade version of the game. This came out in 2021 and features new and updated models, a new character by the name of Kurosawa Koto, a new ghost, and even a new ending. 29. The game also had a 3D sound novel called Zero Sound Horror that started on August 1st, 2002. This was a series of short episodes, around 5 minutes each, that you could receive in your voicemail if you had a DDI pocket cell phone. The story was about 2 women and a man who visited a rope house with their cell phones and are attacked by various Himuro Mansion spirits. 30. The game also has a novelization called Zero, the novel, and it's touted as being written by Mafuyu himself. The idea for this came from Shibata himself, who experienced an interesting glitch while playtesting the game one day, and then decided to use that to expand into a full-length novel. The story is about Mafuyu, a journalist, who visits some game developers to start making a novelization of their new game, Zero. But then, strange things start to happen. His sister goes missing, as though she never existed, and the lines between reality and game seem to blur. And that is 30 facts about Fatal Frame 1, where it all started. But what did you guys think of this one? Are there any other characters or games you'd like me to explore? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.